Hey folks, it's Chris Pugh here. Just wanted to give a little bit of a new updated rig rundown since it's been a little while since I've done that, and I've changed a couple of things out over the course of the last year or so. So I've got a few different options that I'm working with, along with some of the standards that I've used in this rack, but also incorporating that with the Waves LV1 setup. So the first thing that's really kind of changed out is actually the main front end for everything. So I've got it connected here just kind of for um, display purposes, but it's also like, so this is the main input rack, which consists of a couple of Ionic 16 stage boxes, which has Waves' new signature preamp in them. Definitely a pretty substantial upgrade from the prior offerings that were available. But yeah, lots of some cool color shaping type of character things. But one of the main things is like keeping that form factor in a 2 RU per unit. So that gives me 32 inputs by I think 20 outputs on the analog side. And because there's 8 outputs on each one of these, and then there's another 2 on the back, along with a pair of AES3 I/O in that. So with those two being in a 4U form factor with the pair of them, along with the 1RU custom chassis Netgear GS108 switch that has 4 ports on the front, 4 ports on the back. The Waves always stay pinned into a couple of ports on that, along with a little Whirlwind power brick down there. All of that actually just pops right into that little Pelican 1637 that it's on. So you can just as easily roll it into a venue, or can check it and put it on an airplane. So that's kind of handy. And then coming over here, still the same little OCD Labs chassis thing with the fit controller with a version 3 Extreme compact server, and then first gen of the Axis 1 machines running the host for the mixing software, currently on version 15 of that. And then, so one of the things is obviously, so this chassis also gets can get fitted into another 1637. That particular one is just sitting right there. And with a few offerings of show files that I've got happening at this point in time, it's I have the option to just fly with just that and the I/O, and I've got a fully flyable front of house system that connects pretty seamlessly to a monitor system through a little through just a little another set of fly racks that occupy about the same amount of space. So that's kind of cool. And then I've used this system rack for a little while now. It's got a MADI converter up top, which is a pretty vast piece of functionality, but it's also it's the direct out SG MADI version, redundant power supplies. It's got an extremely stable internal clocking system, which is why I'm actually using that for the primary clock for the whole system. And then the little IOC below that allows for a little bit of additional I/O, as well as a pair of headphone outputs. And then one of the primary functions of this also allows me to get AES drive into the Lake processor, which is the primary front of house drive front end. So I take AES and go right into the Lake, and then I can spit out analog or AES out of the backside of it for a typical 4-channel drive system for left, right, sub, and fill. And then, so below that, there's just a little bit of panel for some inputs, mic line inputs, and some line outputs for if I need to connect any monitors or anything like that. One additional AES I/O that I'm actually using is connected to the back of the IOC as well, directly there. And then options for external word clock over the BNC connectors, and then a few extra sound grid ports, because in this rack I also have one of the HP 16 port switches, so that allows me to connect have all this stuff interconnected on the SoundGrid ecosystem for that. So below that, we've got another standalone Axis One. In this configuration, it's primarily just running the lake control software, and I'm also running, have the ability to run Smart on that as well. Followed by a pair of Extreme servers. So there's a Gen 2 and a Gen 3 down there. Little drawer and another little power conditioner for all of that. So there's that, and then we've got coming over here, there's the this is the kind of larger expansion option. So the small portable monitor is connected to that other standalone Axis One in this rack, and then I've just got the MacBook that's set up primarily doing just recording and playback. Right now it's doing playback from a recent show, so I've just got multi-tracks running back through that, and that's all done over the SoundGrid driver. The contents of the racks, some of the things have stayed the same. I've changed out a couple other little pieces. It's one of the nice but can be kind of expensive things about going with the analog side of things. It's like, it's kind of a living organism, and I can sort of change pieces out a little bit here or there as the needs kind of evolve for things. But sort of keeping in with the how I've done things for a little while, like basically from here over to here is a primary lead vocal chain. I'm just doing basically just high pass, low pass on the console side of things, and then going into the 500 version of the 5045, so it's a 545 unit, and then into a couple of IGS units, so a Blue Stripe 1176 model, and then an LA2A optical type thing for the standard little VCA into an opto circuit, so into serial compression there. I have one of the 542 units that I primarily just use for the silk texture on that to accentuate some of the upper mid things after a little bit of that compression has been applied. But I also have the tape saturation feature on there, which actually works as a pretty unique sounding tape distortion effect, and I'll only turn it on or off based off of if I kind of actually want to go there with it, and I'll use that for as kind of an effect type thing. So following all that with the inductor EQ, so 500 version of what's very similar to like their Shelford channel or even maybe like an older 1073 or something like that. So that's all in one insert there that goes on the main lead vocal channel. With this DBX piece off to the second piece of I/O. That one is just a send return. I've got most of the drum close mics going through that as an added like send return subharmonic effect that I've got coming back in, and that goes back and gets routed back through the band effects buses along, and then rounding out that little 500 rack with the AMS Neve RMX16 500 version. And it's still been doing a really, really fantastic job as being a hardware unit with the stability that we kind of need as far as something that's a little bit roadworthy. Moving down under that, these next three pieces, the Lexicon, the Veracity, and the Eventide, are all sort of occupying a little bit of AES I/O in the converter that's doing all of this methods of getting in and out of the system. So each of these have AES I/O on them, and that's kind of handy. That means I don't have to chew up additional analog inputs or outputs for it. So the PCM92 is kind of on the longer, very obvious sounding drum reverbs, and those kind of work hand in hand with the non-lens sound from the AMS. Bracasti's doing most of the longer, more obvious forward vocal reverbs. And that's also kind of paired up with a little bit of a shorter one that I'm doing in software. With the Eclipse, just kind of doing, that's a really, really vast, cool unit that I've kind of only scratched the surface. It's doing a fantastic job of like the of an ADT type, multi-point pitch shifter type thing, to have kind of the to have a bit of a unique double tracked or sound like that. So that's what those are doing. With the Bricasti, I've got it sort of set up with the recall buttons on the front, so can very quickly kind of go between 4 different types of vocal reverb sounds that I'd want to go for based off of the song on the hardware unit, to kind of match that up with the software that's doing kind of the shorter little space piece. Below that, still utilizing the Neve summing mixer that kind of takes everything out from the group level, and I do all the actual summing mixing and using all 16 line inputs and the outputs for a pair of stereo buses that end up driving the matrix section of the drive of the console. So still doing all of the actual processing on the group side in software, which by having the insert function available on that does give me the option to be able to do that in hardware if I ever wanted to expand the size and maybe sort of do some of that hardware insert stuff in, say, 500 gear or just more rack spaces or anything. So that's handy to have, but for the sake of cost and space right now, still doing a lot of that software processing, and with the flexibility of that unit, I'm still able to do that at a pretty effective point. And then so Stereo 1 is still the main band fader, and Stereo 2 is the vocal, and then so all the band and band effects get kind of summed into Stereo 1, and all the vocal effects get summed into Stereo 2, and then those discreetly can drive the matrix outputs of the console that end up doing driving the PA. After those stereo buses, I do have something in between the converter, since I'm using the converter to get out and in of both the line inputs and the outputs here to get in and out of the system. So on the band fader, that's still coming out on Stereo 1, going into the Fusion and then in and out, and then the API is actually in the discrete insert path of the Fusion. So I'm not using the transformer saturation on the Fusion, rather just basically letting the API kind of be in that circuit and just barely sort of touching it a little bit. It certainly adds a kind of flavor there. With the vocal fader getting output into the Mag EQ4M, primarily using that air band, and then just sort of doing a little bit of a standard notch around 160 to make sure there's no mud in it. And then with the very bottom piece there being the Symphony, which is currently configured as a 24x24 analog and an 8x8 AES I/O, which comes in very handy for the amount of channels that I'm trying to utilize, with most of those being chewed up by summing mixer inputs, throughputs, and then back for monitoring, and then the outputs on that for system drive. So that's kind of what's going on with that rack. And with the primary thing, like I am using, because of the fact that I am going outside of the box, even with LV1, which does such a fantastic job of being an impulse aligned automatic delay compensation unit from the inside, because I am going outside, it does require that I actually do some impulse alignment on the at some intentional stages. And I'm trying to let the console handle as much as it can, but as soon as you go outside the box, which means, and since I'm kind of spitting out groups as stems right there, it's pretty much all bets are off at that point, along with using any kind of like insert I/O or anything like that. The converter math is all very predictable based off of sample rate and clocking intentionality, but and then also the buffer size is a big part of that too. But because it is going outside, especially for the dry sources, on this one I believe I actually have all the FX returns impulse aligned on it, just to take it one step further. But it's by doing all of that, I'm able to since on LV1 I don't have the same functionality as I did on the Digico offerings as far as the actual strip by strip delay instantiation model. So what I'm doing is, for every single one that actually has that, like right before the insert, I'm actually doing their very small light version of the in-phase plugin, which is just a single channel. So I can still take the same measurement path that I do over the with an FFT to determine the longest one, along with adding a little bit of a little bit of a few samples in there just to kind of have as a control. And then this one actually ends up being this base path ends up being the longest organic path, which works out very well. So I can add just a few samples to that and have that as the control group, and then everything else just kind of comes through here. And I don't have the group impulse alignment piece on the band effects or the vocal effects fader, because I'm actually doing all of those at the channel return level. So for instance, here's a drum room reverb, which actually ends up being just an internal software base, but because we are still routing through all this stuff, it does still apply if you're going to go that route with the impulses. So I still have an alignment piece there, along with obviously all of the hardware that actually goes through the RMX16. Not only is it going through the apogee converters, but it's also going through, since that is a unit that has like the RMX16 itself is a unit that actually has A to D converters built into it, so it's going to have a throughput time in its own right. So that happens right there. And then especially things with digital I/O, things like the PCM92, Bricasti, and the Eclipse. So all of that has impulse alignment elements instantiated there, so I can actually use that in the FFT and see what's going on and make sure everything is getting spit out, and all comes back down to these two faders here, which end up being the elements that actually drive those matrix outputs. So it gets driven directly from there, which correspond with the two band fader, vocal fader, and all that is summed at this point, and they basically just get spit right into here, and that's where I drive it to the matrix from there. Left right gets everything, and then the sub gets the stuff that is not, that it does not get the vocal fader, because never gonna end up putting these vocals in subs. And then the front fill, center fill gets everything too. Okay, so that's kind of a baseline little rundown of what's going on, and yeah, there's a lot of information there, but it's pretty cool to have some nice flexibility and be able to break this apart from like just something that can fly in an airplane. I've also got a version of the show file that just basically just uses essentially up to here with everything, and then another one that actually has all these fun pieces of real metal incorporated into it. So hope everyone's doing well. Cheers, everybody.